Old Crow, Yukon Territory. The morning of the 11th of March, 1969. The Porcupine River is frozen hard. The settlement stands on the north bank above the Arctic Circle, and there is no road running into this place in any direction, and none running out. There never has been. Constable Warren Townsend of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police is on the river ice with 21 dogs stretched out on a gang line and a loaded freight sled behind them. Beside him is Special Constable Peter Benjamin, Vuntut Gwitchin, of this community. The route in front of them runs east off the Porcupine, over the Richardson Mountains, down to Fort McPherson in the Northwest Territories, on to Arctic Red River in the Mackenzie Delta, and back, roughly 500 miles, by the figure the force itself would publish afterwards. None of that is unusual. The RCMP had been running winter dog team patrols out of its northern detachments since the 1890s. This was a documented, routine method, worked for 70 years. What is unusual is that this patrol had already been labeled before the sled moved. It was on the record, in advance, as the last one. And not for any reason on the ground, not weather, not ice, not anything either man could read from the country in front of him. So what had happened in the first week of March 1969, and why did something decided that far away determine what happened on this river? In the first week of March 1969, the RCMP announced that its remaining dog teams would be replaced with snowmobiles. 1 week later, the Old Crow Patrol left. That is the entire mechanism. There is no incident behind it, no failure, no accident, no review. A procurement decision was taken, and a method that had run since the 1890s was given an end date. What was being retired was a specific institutional capability. A 21-dog team with a loaded freight sled is a self-contained unit that can be put into country with no roads, no fuel supply, no landing strip, and no depot, and kept there for weeks. It carries its own food, its own shelter, its own repair kit, and the feed for the animals that move it. Its range is set by how much frozen fish is lashed under the canvas and where the caches are. That was the strength. The limit was the other side of the same fact. Once that team was over the Richardsons, the institution could not see it, could not reach it, and could not send it anything. Whatever the detachment held for communications in 1969, and the specific fit at Old Crow is not something the published record settles, it did not change that. For most of this route, the force's entire operational presence was 2 men and what was on the sled, and one thing that was not on the sled at all. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you have been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of Canadian patrol between 1900 and 1980. The vehicle, the posting, the territory knowledge that years in one place built in the officer who covered the same ground in 4 seasons, and the communities those officers served, in the full complexity of what that service meant in this era. Not Mountie mythology. The documented operational and human reality of patrol in a country whose geography required its officers to know their territory the way no centralized system has ever been asked to know it. What did a lifetime on one river give a special constable that no equipment order written in Ottawa was ever designed to hold? And if you served in this era, or your family did, put it in the comments. If you served at a northern detachment, or your father or grandfather did, what did the man who ran the dogs know about that route that never got written into a patrol report? Next on this channel, the Dawson to Fort McPherson route and the 1910 Fitzgerald Patrol. What a map could carry, and what it could not. Back on the road. What the sled did not carry was the route. There was no forecast for the country between the Porcupine and the Peel. There was no dispatcher who could tell them which side of a pass was blown clear and which was loaded. The mapping available for that terrain in 1969 was adequate for knowing where you were in general terms, and useless for the question that actually governs a loaded sled. Is this specific ground crossable today, with this weight, in this wind? The answer to that question existed. It just did not exist in an institutional form. It existed as ground knowledge held by people who had traveled that country repeatedly, in the seasons, and knew what it did. And here is the part that matters for how this patrol is usually told. Constable Townsend was a regular member of the force. The published record does not establish how long he had been at Old Crow, and after this patrol he received a routine transfer to Watson Lake Detachment on the Alaska Highway at mile 635, nearly 800 miles south, a different country entirely. The man who had the route in him was the other one, and he held a rank that most people who tell this story have never had explained to them. What was a special constable in the RCMP, and what was that rank actually doing on this patrol? The force had hired indigenous men as special constables since as early as the March West of 1874. The official description of the role is plain. They acted as guides and interpreters for members who did not know the area. As the RCMP pushed into the Arctic after 1903, that role became structural. The dog team patrol system did not work without it. Read that description again, because it is doing something the force may not have intended. It states, in the institution's own words, that its northern operations depended on knowledge the institution did not possess and could not generate. It could train a constable. It could not train him into a country. Peter Benjamin was Vuntut Gwitchin of Old Crow. His people had been in that country continuously, the Crow Flats, the Porcupine, the Caribou Range, and had been moving through it seasonally long before there was a detachment to be posted to. Old Crow only became a permanent settlement through the 1950s. The RCMP post itself had been moved there from Rampart House, so the arrangement on that river on the 11th of March was not an officer with local help. It was an institution renting, at a constable's wage, a body of land knowledge it had no other way of obtaining. The first test of it came eastward, at the mountains. What did crossing the Richardsons in March require that neither the sled nor the force could supply? The Richardson Mountains are not high by the standards of western ranges. That is not what makes them difficult. What makes them difficult is that they sit across the wind. They are largely above tree line, and in March they are scoured. Snow stripped off the exposed ground and loaded into the lee, so that the surface changes from bare gravel to bottomless drift inside a few hundred yards. The force's own account of this patrol records severely low temperatures and high winds over much of the route. In that country, the operational questions come one after another, and none of them can be deferred. Is this lee slope loaded or is it packed? Will this creek have overflow under the snow, which at 40 below will put a dog's foot into water and then into ice? Does that cloud bar on the ridge mean 6 hours or does it mean 2 days? When visibility closes to the fourth dog on the line, do you sit down and lose a day of feed, or do you keep the team moving on the drift direction alone? Here is the thing that gets lost when this is told as a wilderness story. None of that is endurance. It is reading. It is a technical skill with a very long training period, and the training period is a life. The country tested it, and then the dogs paid part of the bill. What did the trail conditions do to the team, and what did the two men have to decide about it? The trail iced. The force's report afterwards states it directly. The dogs suffered cut feet on the icy trail, and one animal had to be destroyed during the patrol. That sentence is worth sitting with, because it is the whole system in one line. A dog team is not transport in the way a vehicle is transport. It is 21 animals whose condition is the operational limit, whose feet are the tires, and whose feed is the fuel. And every one of those variables degrades on a hard trail in ways a man has to notice early, or not at all. And on this patrol, the men made the one genuine field decision in the whole story. The planned route was cut short. All three of the accounts agree on this. The final portion was dropped because of the going for the dogs. That is worth marking. This patrol ended as a method because of an equipment order, but it was shortened as a journey because two men on the ground looked at their animals and made a call that nobody 2,000 miles away was in any position to make, or even to see. They came off the mountains into the delta and into the settlements, Fort McPherson and Arctic Red River, which is now Tsigachik. What did a patrol like this actually mean in those communities? And what does honesty require us to say about it? Here is where this channel does not take the easy road in either direction. In a fly-in and dog trail country, a patrol arriving was a functional event. Northern members were frequently the only government employees in the region, and the tasks ran from law enforcement through to carrying the mail. That is the RCMP's own description of the job. For an isolated settlement, the arrival of a team was contact, service, and in some circumstances, the only route to help there was. And in the same decades, in the same country, the same force was the instrument of things that caused deep and lasting harm. Yukon RCMP have publicly acknowledged the force's role in delivering First Nations children to residential schools, Choautla at Carcross, Lower Post, Aklavik, and others. In the Eastern Arctic, The RCMP's own 2006 review confirmed that hundreds and perhaps thousands of Inuit sled dogs were shot by members and other settlement authorities through the 1950s and 1960s, and the Qikiqtani Truth Commission found the loss of those dogs inseparable from the loss of the ability to live on the land. Both of those are the institutional context of the man standing on that riverbank in a force parka, and the second man on that sled was Vuntut Gwichin, from that community, wearing the same uniform. This channel does not resolve that. It reports it. So what, precisely, ended in April of 1969? Less than most people assume. By 1969, only 4 RCMP detachments in the entire country still held sled dogs. The dog team had already been superseded almost everywhere by aircraft and by machines. When the final decision came, the remaining dogs were ordered destroyed. Some were given away. The force ran one patrol to mark the end. The institutional case for the change was real, and it should be stated without irony. A snowmobile does not have to be fed on days it is not working. It does not require a year to train and several years to become useful. It does not have to be nursed over an ice trail. It can be crated and flown into a fly-in community. And critically, this is the part that decides these things. Any member can be taught to operate one in an afternoon. That last point is the whole story of Canadian policing after 1969, in one sentence. The machine made the officer interchangeable. A dog team did not. A dog team required a man who knew the animals and a man who knew the country, and neither of those was transferable. So what did the new model ask of a northern member, and what did it stop asking? Townsend and Benjamin came back into Old Crow on the 5th of April, 1969. The distance is reported differently depending on who is counting, and this channel will not pretend otherwise. The contemporary Yukon subdivision statement, attributed to Inspector R.S. Wood, gives 500 miles in 20 days of hard traveling, plus 2 rest stops at Fort McPherson. The RCMP Veterans Association account gives approximately 800 kilometers over 25 days. Royal Canadian Mint documentation gives 804.5 kilometers. Take the range. Roughly 500 miles, 20 traveling days, inside a patrol of 26. Then the institution did what institutions do. Townsend received a routine transfer to Watson Lake, and Inspector Wood noted that spring breakup had made it impossible for aircraft to land at Old Crow to move him. Read that as a piece of administration, and it is nothing. Read it as a model, and it is the entire transition. The regular member is a unit that gets moved. What he knows about the Porcupine is not an asset the personnel system tracks, because if it were tracked, moving him would have a cost, and the system is built on the premise that it does not. Peter Benjamin was not transferred anywhere. He was already home. So what was in him that was never in a file? Everything the route required, which lee slope loads and which blows clear, where the overflow runs, what the light does on the ridge before the wind gets up, which creek to take when the main valley is drifted in, when a team is finished, and the honest thing is to shorten the route. None of that was in the patrol report, because the patrol report was not designed to hold it, and nobody ever asked for it in a form that could be stored. In March 1969, the RCMP announced that its remaining dog teams would be replaced by snowmobiles. The last patrol departed Old Crow on the 11th of March and returned on the 5th of April. The remaining dogs were ordered destroyed. Some were given away. What the change gave the institution: speed, reliability, a machine that did not need feeding, and members who could be posted anywhere and be operational immediately. Those are real gains, and they were not imaginary in 1969. What it did not give the Porcupine River country, anything that knew the Porcupine River country, the machine got there faster. It did not know the thing the man walking ahead of the lead dog knew. Nobody asked what that thing was before the harness went onto the storeroom wall. The river is still there. The wind still loads the same slopes in the same march. The knowledge is somewhere else now, in the community, where it always actually was, and not in the institution that borrowed it for 70 years at a constable's wage. If this channel is going to keep documenting what Canadian patrol officers knew about their territories and what it cost the institution when that knowledge left, subscribe. There are more roads, more detachments, more crossings, more patrols with 3 pieces of information the file did not contain, and none of it was ever asked to write itself down. The equipment order was signed in an office. The route was in a man in Old Crow, and no order has ever been written that could requisition that. And if you have a patrol route, a posting, a winter road, a detachment, put it in the comments. If your family served in the North, or lived in a community the patrols came to, what did you know about that country that the force only ever found out by asking? Next, Dawson to Fort McPherson, 1910. 4 men, a route they had all traveled, and the winter they went without the one thing this patrol had.